All right, so this is going to be a continuation of your review video. Sorry, I'm trying to record these videos within sections and have like a nice stopping point, but that just didn't work out. Okay, so we were talking about long-run costs, and we were about to talk about economies of scale and increasing returns to scale and all that good stuff. But all costs are avoidable in the long run. So we said that we have a production function in the long run where both labor and capital and all the inputs and the vectors of inputs of production are variable. They can be changed. And so we said that for firms' long-run decisions determine its short-run costs for sure, right? And we can think of this with examples. We've talked about like the Tesla example where Elon Musk originally underestimated the demand for Teslas. It was closer to probably Srac3 with maybe a much heftier capital equipment or plant. That would be the cost minimizing Srac curve. We can discuss the logic at maybe a later date, but these are supposed to be sort of short videos. But in the short run, you kind of live with those consequences of long run decisions. Because firms can't vary capital in the short run or their fixed input, but can in the long run, the short run cost is at least as high as long run cost, and is higher if the wrong mix of capital is chosen. So conceivably, Elon Musk deciding to move from Srac1 to Srac3, right, along this long run average cost curve, could be a mistake, right? I mean, maybe the demand for Tesla products is high now, but as more firms maybe decide to enter the market, maybe this isn't the right short-run average cost curve. You won't actually ever have to draw this, the long-run average cost curve, as enveloping short-run average cost curves. You just kind of have to know the idea behind it. Okay, so cool. So now I want to get into why is the long run average cost curve, this model, shaped the way it is, right? So we can see that it's kind of U-shaped. Let's talk about why, the short run average total cost curve, which is going to be the most important cost curve with the marginal cost curve, average variable cost, we're going to pay less and less attention to it. But why is it initially downward sloping and then sort of upward sloping? Well, it's initially downward sloping because we've discussed this before. Essentially, fixed cost gets divided over increasing output, right? So the fixed cost curve would kind of be like a horizontal asymptote, right? It would just kind of hug as you had more and more, output. And then, of course, with diminishing marginal returns, right, the phenomenon that takes place because of diminishing marginal product, and we see it in these cost curves as an increasing marginal cost curve, it eventually will pull the average total cost curve up, right? But of course, you can't get this phenomenon, right? This is a short-run phenomenon, the law of diminishing marginal returns. Here's where I'm trying to relate the ideas and concepts, right? This is a short-run phenomenon, right? We hold capital fixed, and so we get diminishing marginal returns because we get diminishing marginal product. But now capital can vary. So this can't be the reason why the long-run average cost curve is, shaped the way it is, right? Short-run average cost curve, again, because the fixed cost is getting divided over increasing output, and then, of course, eventually diminishing marginal returns kicks in. So why is the long-run average cost curve shaped the way it is? But before we get into that, I better sort of, name sort of zones of the long-run average cost curve. So one, probably represents economies of scale, which is the property of a cost function whereby the average cost of production falls as output expands. These are all vocabulary terms that apply to long-run cost functions. And then 2, we have no economies of scale. And then at 3, we have diseconomies of scale, which is a property of a cost function whereby the average cost of production rises when outcome increases, or when output increases. So why does this happen? Well, it can happen for several different reasons. These economies of scale is probably related to increasing returns to scale. These terms have to deal with the relationship between cost and output, and these have to deal with the relationship between input and outputs. And increasing returns to scale is, one potential explainer of economies of scale, but it need not be the only one. But for this introductory microeconomics class, we can go ahead and say that these sort of concepts are related, or can be related at the very least. So increasing returns to scale happens. It's the property of a production function whereby output rises more than in proportion to an equal increase in all inputs. So if you increased labor by 2 and increased capital by 2, your production may more than double, right? This is what this sort of represents. Constant returns to scale, where you increase inputs are increased by a certain percentage, output increases by the same percentage, and then decreasing returns to scale is the same idea, but if you doubled inputs, your output would less than double, right? So these describe the relationship between output and inputs, and this describes the relationship between costs, right? So these can explain, economies of scale can take place because we expect increasing returns to scale, maybe initially for whatever reason, and then maybe constant returns to scale, and then eventually decreasing returns to scale. We assume as economists that you're eventually going to get decreasing returns to scale. If you didn't, then that firm would just take over the entire economy. But for some firms, it seems to be taking a rather long time before they experience decreasing returns to scale, like perhaps Amazon. Okay, but what explains this, right? Why do these take place? Well, increasing returns to scale can happen because maybe and usually we think of this as kind of happening, this is just like a simplification, like a model, right? We usually think of increasing returns to scale as happening over a range of, smaller output relative to constant returns to scale and decreasing returns to scale. Maybe constant returns to scale happening over a range of intermediate output, and then decreasing returns to scale happening over a range of increasing output. So you can get increasing returns to scale and economies of scale essentially by gains from specialization, right? Think about, the productivity increase in factories, right? There's a bit of a learning curve in a lot of different industries, and we can think of that learning curve over the long run, or having an impact in the long run cost function by being shown as a downward sloping initial cost function. Why might you get decreasing returns to scale? Well, you can think about, management, and maybe this is a limitation of our production function, where management isn't included in our production function, but as you're hiring more units or workers, you potentially need more extensive management. We can also think about buck passing. Maybe people are starting to pass on responsibilities in larger and larger type firms, and so that may be a potential reason that we get decreasing returns to scale. You have to know these terms. These are the property of a cost function whereby, economies of scale, diseconomies of scale talk about cost and output in the long run, and then returns to scale, decreasing returns to scale or constant returns to scale. They can very well explain this. They don't necessarily have to be the only. They may not be sufficient explainers of these phenomenon, and I imagine there will be a more extensive discussion about that later. But you can think about these ideas as being related, and increasing return, or for now, and increasing returns to scale as potentially, as these ideas, right? These returns to scale ideas, being about the relationship between input and output. Okay. Cool. All of this is long run, right? This does not apply to the short run.